Welcome to UO Today. I'm Paul Peppis, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. My guest today is award-winning journalist and photojournalist Ann Curry. A former NBC News Network anchor and international correspondent, Curry is an alumna of the University of Oregon's School of Journalism and Communication. Curry is host of a new PBS series, We'll Meet Again, featuring dramatic reunions of people whose lives crossed at pivotal historical moments. Curry has served as a member of the UO Board of Trustees since 2014. Thank you, Ann, for coming on the show.
Hey, Paul.
Tell us first about your early life growing up in Ashland, Oregon.
Well, actually, you might be surprised to know that I grew up all over the world, but I ended up in Ashland, Oregon, where my father after my father retired from the Navy. And at that time, Ashland, which is, of course, the home of the Oregon Shakespearean Festival, had only 15,000 people. And it was a wonderful place to finish growing up. There were wandering minstrels and people reciting Shakespeare, walking through Lithia Park, and Ashland Senior High was a great place to study. Watergate was happening, civil rights movement, the women's liberation movement. Much later came the gay rights movement, but it was a Vietnam War, of course, very intense time. And I think being in Ashland, a place where ideas were encouraged and embraced and debated constantly, it was a fantastic place to finish my youth.
So how did you, I think you're beginning to explain the answer to my next question, which is what led to your interest in journalism and your desire to pursue a degree in journalism?
Well, my dad and I used to watch Walter every night. We used to watch Cronkite giving the news, and then Dad would want dinner, and the dinner would be on the table, and I'm the oldest of 5 kids, so we would all sit down and we'd start to have dinner, and then Dad at some point would say, "What is wrong with those Vietnam War protesters?" And then I'd say, "Well, Dad, they have a point. What are we doing in Vietnam?" And then he'd say, "I can't believe you're my daughter." And then this all-out debate would begin. It would happen so often, so frequently, that my brothers and sisters would pick up their dinner table, step up from the dinner table, pick up their plates, and sometimes eat in the living room because they wanted to avoid what was about to happen. And my dad and I would talk about issues, and I came to conclude that what mattered a long way from Ashland, Oregon, way across the ocean, mattered to me and to my family and to my community, and that I needed to care about these things. And there was so much going on at that time. And my dad would always say, "Ann, whatever you do, do something that is of some service to others." And so at one point I told my dad, this retired career military guy, I told him, "I think I've decided what I'm going to do with my life because it's going to be of some service. I'm going to be a journalist." And he was horrified. And he said, "No, Ann, when I said do something of some service, I meant for you to join the military service." And so he was horrified that I was going to become a reporter. But it was really kind of his fault in some ways. And also, it was also something else. It was also, I had learned and been deeply impacted by also not just these other world events, but my reading of history and my fascination of history. And specifically, the deep impact learning about the Holocaust had on me. And I kept thinking, why, how can these people survive? Not just survive, but rise. What is it in them that allows them to be after that? And I actually did what any, red-blooded American girl would do in the community of Ashland, Oregon, caring so much about wanting to know more about the Holocaust and the Jewish people. I proceeded to try to teach myself Yiddish, which was obviously terrible failure. I learned some words. I learned what a pisher was, and I learned that I was one. But beyond that, and checking out the joys of Yiddish repeatedly from the Ashland Public Library, I realized you just really can't teach yourself Yiddish. But I cared a lot about that story and how it wasn't reported, how it wasn't on the front page of the New York Times, how it was reported as something that people didn't know about, but they knew about it in Brooklyn. They just didn't know about it in New York City. Maybe some did. And I vowed to be the kind of reporter who would fight for stories that mattered. And that I kind of had a not on my watch moment. And so I think that's really what led me to think about the power of information, and the power of knowledge. And that if you can't say I didn't know, then what are you going to do about it? And maybe you can't do anything about it. But I've learned in my work, interviewing people in refugee camps, in Darfur and Congo and places, Somalia, Kosovo, that those who suffer, it matters to them that you know, that they do not suffer in silence. So whether you can do something or not, do not let them suffer in silence. And so that was always my line has always been genocide. If I ever see anything, smells, feels like it could be genocide, it's a place where you have to put your attention, and that's why I've spent so much of my real focus on war and human suffering.
So you've been in the profession for over 30 years.
Well, almost 40. Whoa.
You've seen a lot of changes. You talk about being inspired by Walter Cronkite. I think there are many people who are of our generation who think, where's our Walter Cronkite? Tell us about your view on the kind of changes that have happened in journalism in the past 30, 35 years.
It's rocked today. You're absolutely right. It's rocked today, essentially mostly by an uncertainty over its financial future that comes after a period during which it went from being a public service, a requirement, a profession guided, especially in broadcasting, by a rule called the fairness doctrine, which meant that you had to give both sides, to now one that is seen as a money-making enterprise. So if you have a situation where a profession is moved into, and became effective as a money-making enterprise, then suddenly be rocked by some financial uncertainty, then it's going through a transition. And it's been a pretty painful transition. I think we are living in the best of times and the worst of times in journalism. I think we are witnessing today in real time an old-fashioned newspaper war between the New York Times and the Washington Post over how to cover the Trump administration. I think there are voices of incredibly admirable journalists who are writing and are who are broadcasting. Although more of them are writing than broadcasting these days. And I think that you're also witnessing a lot of what isn't journalism, and yet is purported to be. And I think that the hope, in fact, I would say there's real hope. It's just that we have to get through this period of transition, because I think that news organizations are recognizing not only their responsibility, I think the citizens are recognizing the value of journalism. I think that there are more eager, young, smart future journalists coming out of our J schools, full of vim and vigor, as my father would say, who want to be great, who see this as a calling, as I have never stopped seeing it as, a true service job, as I have always thought of it as. And you even see news organizations stepping up and hiring more investigative reporters, which is a very, very tough and very expensive kind of reporting. And so I think there's real hope at the end. I think we now know that technologists don't know how to do journalism, and they recognize that too. Journalism is not something you learn in school. It's not something that you can just start. You can be a good writer and a very bad journalist. You can be a good videographer and a very bad journalist. Journalism is something that is best done by people who have learned from their mistakes, who recognize that that it's about a kind of judgment, and who are always aware, with humility, of the vulnerability of information. You know, it's not like mathematics, where 2 + 2 = 4. no, you can make a million mistakes in journalism, and people do every day, all the time. But you can actually get really good at being pretty right about giving the important facts that will lead the viewer, the reader, to be better informed and more likely then to see the truth. And that's actually the practice. It's actually a practice. It's not a job for anyone who wants to be popular, wants to be perfect, has one of the problems in journalism is that you have a bunch of young people in school who tend to be A+, A-, maybe students, maybe B+ students, and you force them into conditions in which the best they can do is C+, B- work, because they can't talk to all the sources. They're working against deadline. They don't always have what they need in terms of the technology, the video, to be able to tell the right story, the pictures. And you're constantly working against all of these odds to try to do your best job to give people some access to the truth. And oftentimes, these days, working inside industries now that are trying to sort of, make money off of it. And if you're a pure journalist and you have high ideals, as I have always had and never let go, it can be heartbreaking. And you just have to, it's a slog, but it is a noble slog.
So tell us about the Ann Curry Scholarship Endowment and why you created it.
Oh gosh, I never talk about that. In fact, I've never talked about that publicly. And it's really, just gosh, I don't know if I want to talk about it now. I'll just say that, well, I'll just tell you very briefly, I wasn't really a first generation student, although in some ways I was. My father went to college on the GI Bill, and I grew up never expecting to go to college because there wasn't any money in our house for college. And there was a teacher in high school who was my English teacher, who said, you must go to college. And so she walked me to the high school office and she said, you need to deal with this girl. She has to apply to college. I applied to one college, and that was the University of Oregon, at the last minute, because I wasn't planning to go to college. I had no way to pay for college. And it was because I got in, miracles of miracles, and I got these little scholarships that came from, I was in Ashland, so the Carpenter Foundation was one of them. And there were these little scholarships. And then on top of that, I worked my way through. I work study, and I worked for the Forest Service. I worked for Sears one time. I worked in a bookstore. I made sandwiches. I was a cashier. I worked every single summer and every semester except the last one. When I finally took out a student loan, actually I had little loans here and there. Actually, no, that's not true. I did take out student loans, but I took out a student loan and didn't work, and because I wanted one semester where I didn't have to work, and I had to pay all those loans back. But I got through. At that time, you could get through with a big chunk of your tuition being paid by scholarships. So I wanted to create something. So it's for broadcast and for print, and it's need is a factor, and of course we'd like to give people. So it's a J scholarship for journalists, for future journalism students, and I love journalism so much. I believe in it. It's been like in some ways, it's been my calling. It's been my service, my way of contributing. It's been my a way of trying to be of some value, some worth to the future. I see journalism as an act of faith in the future. I know one is ever a perfect journalist, and I'm certainly not one, but I have strived to do work that has mattered and had some consequence. And so to ease suffering, essentially, to ease human suffering and to reveal us to each other. And so that's been my goal and my effort. In many ways, journalism is like a bad boyfriend. It's you love it, and it doesn't always pay good attention to you, and it's very, very tough. Journalism, but I've never not loved it.
So as if you don't have enough things on your plate, you've also come back to the University of Oregon to serve as a member of our Board of Trustees.
Right. Well, it's a way of giving back. The school, the university has given me so much.
So what are some of the issues that are happening on the board now that are of particular interest to you that really are important for you?
So I got this call asking me if I would serve on the board, and I thought about it, and I thought, I don't know if I have the time to do it, and it was really a struggle at first to figure out the commitment, and it turned out to be bigger, of course, than they always promise you. What really convinced me is that I'm a part of the first independent board for the university, and so it's a foundational board. And the idea that I came to with it is when I met the other people on the board and got a sense, I thought, we could become, it's going to be a struggle because we don't know how it's going to go, but if we could just try to create something of an academic renaissance at the university, that would really be terrific. And the struggle is, of course, that state funding has actually shrunk, and now it's really, really shrunk a lot. And so we depend on donations and tuition, and this has been a real painful part of being on this board. I mean, and I hope we've made all the right decisions, but I worry because I was a poor kid who was going to this school, and I was, living on, honest to God, I was living on, went to the health food store and I bought brown rice, and I bought sardines and mustard sauce, those little canned, gross, and I would make the brown rice and I'd pour the sardines and mustard sauce, and I would basically make that, and that would last me a week, and I would eat that. That was my protein and my carbs, whatever. Sometimes I'd get a little vegetables in there, but that was one reason to work in food service, because you got to have a sandwich or something sometimes. But so I know what it's like, and I know what it's like to have a loan coming out, although not as big as these that are today. So I worry a lot about that. So I was really, I think that was one of the reasons I was invited to the board, was because they recognize I would be compassionate to especially in-state students who are, if they don't know it, they are getting an amazing deal. It doesn't feel like a deal because it's a lot of money. But in terms of the actual cost of educating them, it doesn't even, the tuition doesn't even come close. Mm-hmm. So, how do we get them through? And the other thing that's really kind of helped me feel a little bit better about it, although I do actually lose sleep at night thinking about students who can't afford to go here, is that there has been something that's been created that it's called Pathway Oregon, and it's really great for Oregonians because Oregon students can, essentially get a big chunk of their tuition paid for, if not a free ride, depending on a lot of factors. And so, but it still means that a lot of students can't go. So I struggle with the cost of education, and I wanted to be a good voice there. But I also don't want the university to go into the red, and I also want the university to not be seen as a football school, because it's not, but to be seen for what it actually is, which is a great football school and a fantastic academic school that is actually going to become not only known as for its academics, but actually be admired for even a greater level of academics. And that's the future of the university. So balancing these things is tough, and I think the job has been harder than I expected. In fact, I know it has.
So in terms of hard jobs, you have a new hard job, which is your new show, We'll Meet Again. Tell us about that show and where the inspiration for it comes from.
So it's a documentary series that's airing on PBS and on Facebook as well. Facebook got excited about it and started airing it, asked if they could, and so they also live stream it and then post it. So it's a documentary series about world-changing events, the people who are caught up in these events, and they're often wish to find the one who helped them survive, emotionally or physically. One, in fact, was about a Holocaust survivor in World War II who actually survived Kristallnacht, which was a moment during the Holocaust in which Jews were targeted, their churches, their schools, their businesses were targeted. 30,000 Jewish men and boys were rounded up, and this was a moment that was chilling all across Germany. It showed us that, it showed Jews especially, it showed everyone that it was unsafe And if people had not gotten out by then, they knew that they had to get out, especially if they were intellectuals, because they were the ones who were really targeted. And this young boy is now an old man looking for the family that helped him survive emotionally. And so our team helps reunite them when possible. Not always are these reunions possible, but what these reunions have taught me is how much we mean to each other, and how much we can do something, each one of us, for someone else that we may not even remember, that can cause that other person's life to turn in some way that's more positive. There's an Amerasian girl who, from Vietnam, is looking for her American father. A boy who was a boat person who left Vietnam as a child without his parents, who wants to find the big American cowboy from Texas who was an inspiration for him because he was trying to save these boat people, and he was somebody trying to help, and it showed a goodness that this boy never forgot. A man who grew up in a Catholic family where at a time when to be gay was considered a mental illness, and as a result you needed to have electroshock therapy, who was saved from this because of the kindness of a friend who said, "What's wrong with that?" to his being afraid of being gay, and who didn't get electroshock therapy, and Mount St. Helens, which is true here to New York, a woman, there are a couple stories there, a woman who was rescued via helicopter, and never forgot the courage of that National Guard helicopter pilot, who could never have been ordered in because it was too dangerous to order anyone in while the ash cloud was still moving through the air, and yet still went even further to help her find her friends. Some of these stories are about great human courage, and sometimes it's just moments of kindness. And I think what's been really shocking to me more than, and I'll stop because I know I kind of went on and on about this answer, but what's really stunned me is how many people have said that they have felt that these questions were, these episodes were relevant. Because I thought, we're talking about history, something that happened before. I mean, how relevant? But people were saying, no, we're living at a time where we don't see each other, when we're not hearing each other, when we're afraid of each other, and we're especially afraid of the other. And to see that the other is us, and to see that compassion and empathy lives, that it's actually, in my view, and my experience, and in my study, it is actually deeply ingrained in the human gene code, the way we operate, the way our brains work. In fact, it is, deeply part of our evolved being, as well as the other side, the part that lets us be cruel and discriminatory and unkind. We have all of those. It's really about choice. And so what this series is about is those who choose to do for others. And as a result, that unleashes something in each one of us when we see these episodes, I think. We see ourselves as a mirror.
One of the things that's fascinating at the show is in the cases where the person that's being sought has passed away, and the person doing the seeking encounters their family members and tells the story. There's a couple of episodes where the effect of that experience on the children of the person, you can see that for them, even for them, it's an incredibly profound encounter, and they're like learning things about their parent that they never knew.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that is exactly right. I think the thing that's interesting is that there's an impact on the person who's seeking, but there's also a tremendous impact, in addition to the family members, on the person who's being sought. Because in some cases, and can you imagine being 80 years old, or maybe you're 50 years old, and somebody comes up to you and says, "You did this, and it changed my life for the better." Can you imagine what that would feel like? It makes me think, anybody listening, don't hesitate. Like, if there was a teacher or someone in your life who did something, who helped you, that helped you, don't hold back. Seek them out. In some cases you talk about some of the people who are being sought have gone. Well, get in there before they're gone and tell them, because what a gift. And you know what? That's a gift to them and a gift to you. To be able, and that becomes a circle. It's really, it's a great way of remembering that none of us, achieve, live, thrive, emerge into the journey that we're supposed to have. This long, and as they say, the greatest journey is internal. None of us walk that road alone. We walk that road because of others who guided us, maybe made us so angry we went a certain way. There are all kinds of impacts. There's a word, Nelson Mandela made it famous, Ubuntu, I am because of you, we are because of each other. That's what that means. And to recognize that is a way of recognizing the reason to be grateful and to thank those who did that for you one way or another. I think is about having, is a great joy for them and for you.
I think anybody who watches the show makes this argument so eloquently. Any episode, I think, makes the case. It's a very moving show. I'd recommend it to people who haven't seen it yet.
Thank you.
We have a minute left, so this will be the last question. Time flies when you're having fun. You have been I'm an interviewer. I've interviewed a lot of people. You've interviewed far more people than I've interviewed. Is there an interview in your past that is particularly memorable to you that you'd like to tell us about?
Oh, there's so many. You
choose
only have a
anyone.
minute.
Yeah, 1 minute.
World leaders, of course. Obviously, people I've met in terrible circumstances who've just been so incredibly powerful. But I guess the one I would tell you about is the one who really framed all of it. And that was Maya Angelou, who said, Anne, I'm nervous about being interviewed by you. And I said, why? And she goes, well, I reminded myself that I'm a human being and you're a human being, and that nothing you can ask me, I can't imagine, that we're both human beings. And when I reminded myself of this, I realized I didn't have to be afraid, that whenever I'm around another human being, I can guess, because I am human too. And so in this way, we don't have to be alone, which I thought was a beautiful thing. So there you are.
Well, that's a wonderful way of ending our interview. Thank you so much for sharing that story, talking to us about all the things we've talked about.
Sure.
I'm really grateful.
Sure. Pleasure. Thank you.
I've been speaking with journalist Ann Curry. Curry is an alumna of the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication, the host of a new PBS series, We'll Meet Again, and a member of the UO Board of Trustees. Thanks so much for watching.